Welcome everybody to this latest FIDIC webinar in our 2023 series of events. I'm delighted to say that today's event is being supported, as are all our webinars in this new series, by infrastructure engineering software company Bentley Systems, FIDIC's 2023 webinar strategic partner. Thank you, Bentley. We're very pleased and grateful to have Bentley on board and look forward to working with them throughout the year. For those of you who might not be aware, this is a very significant year for FIDIC, as it is our 110th anniversary of the formation back in 2013. We will be celebrating that milestone throughout the next 6 months, so keep your eyes open for what we have planned over the coming year, and please do celebrate our 110 years of FIDIC with us. Today's webinar is on a key subject for our industry, BIM and digital technologies, and I'm very pleased that FIDIC's Digital Transformation Committee have organised today's event, as well as giving attendees an update on the latest industry digital developments, including the use of BIM and how to incorporate emerging technologies in terms of contract. Today's webinar will also look at the different pace of digital adoption across our engineering, construction and infrastructure industry. Digital is changing the way our industry works. Some companies are optimizing the traditional processes of design, construction, and others are developing new business models and new ways of working, constructing and manufacturing. And it's also the case that the industry in different countries is at varying stages in its use of digital technology and innovation. Today's webinar will look at how to incorporate and navigate building information modelling and emerging technologies contractually. What is on the horizon and what lessons are being learned from a broad range of approaches. Although technological investment has historically been lagging in the sector when compared to other industries, there has been a significant acceleration in the investment over the past few years. Technology is certainly seen as one of the main levers to increase the resilience of the sector, with 75% of leaders in a recent industry survey citing technology as the main lever to reduce risks or better manage overruns. So today's webinar is an important one on a very important issue, and we have some expert and insightful speakers to share their experiences with you. They'll be introduced to you shortly by our webinar moderator, Stacy Sinclair, Head of Technology and Innovation at Fenwick Elliott LLP, who is also the chair of our FIDIC Digital Transformation Committee. Before hearing from Stacy, it is my great pleasure to introduce Martina Hess, FIDIC board member and director of CES Engineering Salzgitter, to give a short welcome from the FIDIC board. Martina is based in Zambia and has started her career in Germany. I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that she's worked in many countries throughout the world, making a great contribution to the FIDIC board and to FIDIC. Martina, over to you.
Thank you, Tony, for the welcome remarks and the introduction. I'm very happy that the FIDIC board assigned me to be the primary liaison person to this relatively new established committee, as digital transformation is one of the topics very near to my heart. And throughout my career, I bump into this topic all the time. Today's webinar, BIM and Digital Technologies, will provide insights and lessons learned on implementing building information modeling, or short BIM. With its technical advantages and challenges, as Tony already mentioned. We will look also at how to incorporate BIM contractually, what is on the horizon, and the different levels of maturity in the various parts of the world. As Tony mentioned, I'm based in Africa, and of course here the implementation of BIM has a different status than, let's say, in Europe. However, I encourage now all participants to interact and to post at any time questions or comments or whatever you have relevant to this topic into the chat box. You can see the chat box is already active. a lot of people have joined us. If I'm well informed, we are 645 participants have signed up for today, and 100+ countries. So today's panel speakers will now be introduced by our moderator and committee chair, Dr. Stacy Sinclair. Stacy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be. Thank you so much for joining. It's fantastic to see how many of you are here with us today. I think this really demonstrates just how important today's topic is. And I hope the real enthusiasm, eagerness, and energy, is out there to explore the potential for BIM and other digital technologies to really revolutionize the construction sector. It's my pleasure to welcome you and to moderate today's session. Before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to give you an overview of the Digital Transformation Committee in FIDIC. The committee was formed just under a year ago, and it's comprised of 12 expert and very experienced committee members from across the engineering and digital communities who are really passionate about the transformation of our industry. The past year has been quite active, but very much a period of listening and learning. And ultimately, our purpose of the committee is to identify issues and trends in the digital space that could be potential disruptors to FIDIC, its members, and the wider industry, and assist in developing FIDIC's digital services, including future-proofing and developing FIDIC's products and services in response to changes in digital technologies. Now, on our last webinar back in November 2022, which was titled Going Digital, Latest Industry Trends and Developments, which, if you're interested, is available on FIDIC's website to download or to view if you like. On that webinar, I mentioned that the Digital Transformation Committee generally is looking at two work streams. One, the digitization and in due course, the digitalization of the FIDIC contract suite, as well as identifying the transformation vision, developing a clear, coherent, compelling vision for the digital transformation of the industry. And now I'm very pleased to report that we're also beginning to look at the development of guidance around BIM and how you can incorporate it contractually in FIDIC contracts. I get this question asked many, many times. Now, some of you may have seen that the recently published 2022 reprints of the FIDIC contracts include an update on the advisory note to users of FIDIC contracts where the project uses building information modeling. It is this initial advisory note that we are looking to develop to assist FIDIC contract users to incorporate BIM on their projects. So more on this in due course, but do watch this space as we develop it. So to dive in, if I may. So today's session, as Martina and Tony pointed out, BIM, digital technologies, but really it's about the how in relation to BIM, how to adopt and implement BIM and digital strategies, digital technologies, contractually, commercially, practically, how to overcome real or perceived challenges to adoption and implementation, how to digitally transform, regardless of where you, your project, your client, your country might be at in terms of digital maturity and where you are at on this digital transformation roadmap. And finally, how BIM and other digital technologies have the potential to transform traditional ways of working into new methods and processes, new business models, potentially new revenue streams throughout the whole life cycle of an asset or project. Now, I appreciate this is a tall order to squeeze into the next hour, but we really want to discuss and demonstrate the wide-ranging approaches and varying stages of maturity that exist in relation to adoption and the use of BIM and digital technologies. We hear a lot about automation, artificial intelligence, robotics, drones, smart contracts, generative design. And yes, there certainly are projects which are at that point in their digital journey. However, we must recognize this is not yet universal, and there's still a lot of learning and adoption to come for many, many who are at very different stages in this journey. And to help us with this, today, of course, we have our brilliant panel of experts who have lined up some fantastic case studies and practical examples for you. So whilst today is not necessarily about the what is BIM, I'm sure you certainly will get a good flavor of the breadth and depth of building information modeling from our speakers over the course of the next hour. And hopefully you'll see that BIM is not, or should not be, simply a static 3D model with simply geometric or spatial data, but rather it's a method, it's a process by which all relevant information for the life cycle of a building or asset or project is coordinated, administered, and exchanged amongst the project participants. So in terms of adoption of BIM globally, I think it's fair to say that this can be extremely wide-ranging, as Martina has already alluded to, depending on your jurisdiction, where you are in the world. Other factors involved, of course, obviously, and you'll see this with our speakers today. I don't think I have time to go into where does BIM sit on this adoption curve. By adoption curve, I'm referring to Everett Rogers' popularized his book in the 1962 called The Diffusion of Innovations, and then of course Geoffrey Moore's 1990s Crossing the Chasm, and where it sits on these adoption curves. But I'd like to venture a guess that even though adoption looks different in different jurisdictions, I suggest globally, though, the adoption, the rate of adoption is increasing, and we are somewhere, hopefully, in that early majority, failing which late majority, and indeed, I hope that many of you here today are either the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, you know, and we're all learning through this together. So with that, it would be helpful, I think, for us and the panel to find out. We're going to come to our first poll now, to set the scene. Is it there? Yes, it is there. It'd be helpful for us to know of your experience with BIM. What is your experience? Are you regularly using BIM on your projects and it's really integral to the design and construction process? Or are you sometimes using BIM on your projects, for instance, at the request of the client, because you have to, perhaps as a bolt-on, but sometimes, not always? Or are you hardly ever or never using BIM on your projects? Just give maybe another 20 seconds or so. It'd just be helpful to see where we're at. What kind of adopters do we have in the room with us today? Ooh, a nice even mix. Fantastic. You know, all in the 30s, regularly using BIM, sometimes using BIM, and never using BIM. And I think that's a real testament to, you know, exactly what we were saying. You know, around the world, it is a very different story, a very different message. So fantastic. Thank you very much for taking the time to do that. Right. So with that, we are going to come on to, without further delay, onto our panel session now. I'm going to introduce them each as we come to them, but I'm very pleased to be joined today by Claire Rutkowski from Bentley Systems, Felix from Nippon Koei, Krzysztof Wojslaw, my apologies, from Sweco and Learn Grasshopper, as well as Jeremy Glover from Fenwick Elliott. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. So we're first going to turn to Claire. Claire joined Bentley in 2016 to lead the global IT organization, shaping and delivering a technology agenda across Bentley's business. Claire is now leveraging her extensive engineering and technology expertise as the company's CIO champion. And I must mention, Claire most recently was awarded the top 80 CIOs you should know in 2020, as well as the top 10 most inspiring women leaders in 2022. Claire's been with us previously, and always fantastic to hear from Claire. So Claire's going to kick us off now by providing an industry overview of BIM and digital technologies, as well as give us some good examples of the application of technology in the industry. Thank you very much, Claire. Welcome.
All right. Thanks, Stacy. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to talk to you all. And isn't it an exciting time to be in infrastructure? You know, as Tony said, and as Stacy remarked, we used to be way behind in terms of digital transformation. We all know the surveys, but we're now at a time of rapidly accelerating change, right? And those of us who are not necessarily in a position to change, I think are feeling the pressure that we have to do it. And so this is going to be, I think, a really exciting discussion about some ways that you can change. There are several trends driving this acceleration of change. One of them is government-led mandates, depending where you are in the world. And we'll hear some examples of that from some of our speakers following me. We're also seeing a need for speed, I call it, right? Like we're racing, because there's an increased need to deliver more infrastructure or improve existing infrastructure faster because of changing population patterns, a desire for improved sustainability, and frankly, increased backlog, which is not a problem to have, right? That's a good problem to have. So we have to do things better and faster, but we also have to do that with a reduced workforce, increased competitiveness, and economic uncertainty, which is leading us in many firms to try to figure out ways to drive down our costs. All of those things are amazing triggers for digitalization. In 2022, an AEC Advisors survey showed, that was of 250 global CEOs in the AEC space, showed that we'd reached a very exciting tipping point. For me, exciting after all my years in the industry. Because many of you know, and some of you are probably feeling it, particularly those who aren't applying BIM necessarily right now, is that many changes have to be done on the back of a project, right? Somebody has to be willing to pay for the implementation of digital technology, for the changing of ways of doing things. And when you're doing time and materials or cost plus jobs, that's really hard to justify. I know one of our speakers is going to talk about ways to justify that, but it's tricky. Whereas what happened in 2022 was we crossed the threshold where more projects are now being executed in a fixed fee or lump sum way. So that's exciting because that frees up the funding in many ways to be able to fund digital transformation, to be able to fund widespread adoption of BIM and other technologies. Another survey by Deloitte, just released very recently in the last couple of months, shows that the construction segment of our industry is changing too. More than half of the survey respondents said they are investing in digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, digital twins, and BIM this year. Developers and contractors are also likely to further invest beyond that in digital and physical technologies such as visual intelligence, sensors, IoT devices, robotics, drones, etc. And 44% of survey respondents said they're getting into streamlining workflows, estimation, sustainability calculations, which is something I think we'll probably touch on. It's one of the themes of FIDIC for this year. Firms are also using generative design methods to produce unique optioneering options. And for construction specifically, 46% of Deloitte's respondents are also investing in prefab and modular construction. We're not going to get into that today, but I think it speaks to the rate of change, the adoption rate that's happening around us. There's also a trend towards whole life cycle asset management, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, Stacy mentioned in her opening remarks that depending where you are in the world, BIM may or may not be something that you have to do, right? In some cases, governments are mandating 3D modeling and BIM, but in other cases, not so much. So countries are at varying rates of maturity, just as firms are at varying rates of maturity. Here in the US, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, provides trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars for investment in infrastructure, because yes, we do have the world's 13th worst infrastructure. Yes, we do. It's aging, it's falling apart. And so there's lots of money there. But the interesting part for our conversation today is that billions of dollars have been set aside to very specifically be focused on modernizing technology around infrastructure. And this investment of billions of dollars is targeted in 4 different areas. Integration, that is being able to bring disparate applications and disparate groups of people together on technology platforms to be able to facilitate data sharing and collaboration. There's also money set aside for aggregated data models and the mining of that data in those models, as well as business process automation and enterprise asset management. So we're back to the asset life cycle. So again, there's money behind, let's do it. It's time. The time is now. But because governments are mandating at different rates and owners and operators are demanding at different rates, firms are all at different stages in the adoption of BIM and other technologies as well. And we saw that in the survey response, right? 30, 30, 30, pretty much evenly split. Now, I like to think of digitalization and digital maturity in three different phases. Maybe phases isn't even the right word, stages, because there's lots of different maturity models out there, and some of them are super complicated. But there's really 3 in my mind, because I like to keep things simple. So the first is, are you focused on efficiency? If your firm answered that you never use BIM, or that you only use BIM if a client asks for it, so you're working in a hybrid 2D, 3D environment, sometimes using BIM, sometimes not, then you're probably focusing on efficiency, right? And so you might be planning to implement BIM across your workflows consistently to improve that efficiency and enhance your talent skills, but you're just not quite there yet in terms of consistency. So from a Bentley perspective, some of the firms that I would put in the efficiency bucket that are kind of working on that type of thing. And if you're thinking, well, what can I do? I'm not going to magically say, I flip the switch, we're BIM on everything, and then we're going to go create new revenue streams, because it doesn't work like that, right? You have to kind of one step at a time. And so the firms that we have currently focusing on efficiency are working on things like standardizing their work processes, implementing component libraries so that they can have design components that they use over and over again. And those design components already have all of the metadata in them in order to save time. One large engineering and construction firm that we have has become highly efficient by mandating the use of a single project collaboration tool across all of their suppliers so that they can easily manage transmittals, approvals, and change orders all in one system without having to go to 5 different things. So that's probably your entry level on-ramp to digital transformation. There's lots of other ways that you can do it, but those are a few examples. More mature firms who've already gotten really good at being efficient have freed up time, they've freed up money, they've freed up those resources to be able to focus on effectiveness, the next stage, efficiency, then effectiveness. Firms that are already operating at an effective level are consistently designing with BIM. They have the capacity to deliver digital twins, to maintain those models, and they're realizing that they need those gains in efficiency, effectiveness, and reusable data to improve their competitiveness and sustainability. So an example of this is one large design firm I know mandates the use of a single component library that's actually owned by the design firm, but they mandate the use of that component library by all of their subs so that everything is standard. All the metadata is consistent. It increases efficiency, but it also increases effectiveness because everything has been vetted to meet local standards, to increase quality and safety. Another firm has created smart components. So they took the whole component library thing and made them all parametric, so that everything can be tweaked as needed to meet the needs of the individual case while retaining all of that appropriate metadata. And another firm that is I would put in the effective category is using portfolio-wide data mining. They're finding insights around speed to delivery, trends on change orders, and things like that. So every time every time we see more than X number of change orders, when there's this many milestones, we know that project is in trouble and we're probably going to go over budget. So those kinds of insights can be really useful. And then we get to transformation, which Stacy touched on very briefly. We're getting there. We're seeing it. It's actually not something that's being talked about, but something that's happening. So the transformation in our industry is the creation and maintenance of models that are up to date, that are virtual representations of an asset or a project, including managing these twins or models for their accounts through the life cycle of that asset. We're seeing firms use digital technology to meet sustainability goals through the use of optioneering and in the design process, but also through constant monitoring to make sure, well, we thought it was going to look like this, but in actual fact, the carbon footprint has changed. We don't really know why. Now we need to investigate. And firms are generating revenue through digital offerings. So for instance, some are using digital integration and no-code, low-code development to create new software tools, which they are then selling. So there's a huge increase in competition in this space amongst the most digitally mature firms. They're competing with each other. Frankly, they're competing with firms like Bentley and Autodesk in terms of the software that they're offering. We are seeing firms host and maintain models through the asset lifecycle. I think we'll talk about that a little later when we talk about contracting. Because if I'm an engineering design firm, but I now suddenly have this whole line of business of maintaining models, have I assumed the risk for that if something goes wrong? I think that's a very interesting thing for us to talk about. We've seen firms providing recommendations for maintenance and repair and using technology like AI to detect cracks or rust or other issues in a variety of types of infrastructure like bridges and rail and so on. So the other trend that I would say I see is that the whole asset lifecycle approach is coming to the fore. We all know, and we've all talked in the past about design, produce drawings, hand them off to, depending what type of firm you are, procurement or construction, then things get built, right? But sometimes they have to recreate the models, and that's just silly. So we're seeing a lot more collaboration across the supply chain, but we're also seeing changes in who decides what. Used to be that AEC firms, to a large degree, decided what software they used, how they were going to use it, and what degree of BIM they were going to adopt. But now governments are mandating things. Owners and operators are mandating things. They see the value of having that model from the beginning through to the operation and maintenance of the asset. And so they're mandating, you have to use this piece of software. I own that data. And so there are changes, I think, in roles and responsibilities that come with a whole asset lifecycle approach. It's good. It breaks down the barriers between design, construction and operations, et cetera. But it adds a little level of complexity that we all need to be aware of. And so I think, as we branch beyond BIM into the wider application of digital transformation and talk about the accelerating pace of change, we're seeing firms increasingly hire technology people as well as engineers. Engineers themselves are being required to be savvy in all different kinds of new ways of working. And I think a couple of my fellow panelists will talk about that. But we're also seeing hiring in terms of data scientists and people who are very experienced in artificial intelligence and training models and all sorts of things like that. Data models, I should specify here, given the audience. Lots of examples will follow, as well as we'll talk about some of the contractual considerations that have to be included in order to account for all of this breakdown of barriers and sharing of information, including confidentiality, cybersecurity, and so on. So I hope that gives you kind of a flavor for the landscape that we're in right now. I think there are pressures, but it's exciting.
Claire, thank you so much. It does give a lot of food for thought, very insightful and fantastic way to kick off our session today. If I can just ask you one question before we move on to the next panelist, just a quick one. So if your government isn't mandating BIM, if your clients aren't willing to pay for it, but the designers or the developers, they recognize, you know, the efficiency or the effectiveness or the productivity that BIM can bring to a project throughout its whole life cycle, as you mentioned. What is a firm to do in that situation? How do they get started? Do you just have a top tip for our audience?
Yeah, you know, this is the most common question I get asked. Before joining Bentley, I had a lot of years, 18 years at MWH, an engineering firm. I'm dating myself, but that's okay. And so I totally understand the if the RFP or the request for proposal doesn't call for BIM modeling, then I'm not going to do it because I'm not getting paid for it. And my response to that is a really easy one. Do you want to be an order taker or do you want to be a thought leader? Right? We can all take orders and say, well, no, you know, I'm just going to tick the box and do exactly what is asked. But I think that sometimes we have to help our clients learn what they don't know. Sometimes when they're not asking for BIM, it's because they don't know what the benefits are. And so I think we have a responsibility, even if it's not articulated in the request for proposal, to talk about the benefits of BIM, to talk about how it benefits the ultimate owner in the long run. It's our opportunity to become an advisor and to help people think holistically about the full life cycle of the asset and all the advantages that can be gained. I think another thing that's important for people to think about is, what does that model enable? And one of our case studies today from another panelist is really going to talk about the efficiencies to be gained from running everything, literally everything, from the model. I think you'll be really interested in that because it enables smaller engineering teams to be more self-sufficient through the seamless aggregation of data, right? Models do not, the BIM models aggregate data from multiple sources, which is really exciting because it serves up discrete views of project data to various different stakeholders. And we have so much work to do that collaboration through the entire supply chain is critical. So those are the answers that I would give, is don't take it has to be done on the back of the project, or my client isn't asking for it as the answer, because you're not an order taker. You're a thought leader. So be an advisor and advise and explain why this is important. I think all of the benefits are so compelling that when someone realizes that, maybe they're willing to listen to an alternate proposal or even change their RFP.
Thank you, Claire. That's brilliant. Really, really helpful. Great. We are now going to move on to Nicholas Felix. Nick, hi, welcome. Nick is a chartered civil engineer at Nippon Koei with experience in contract management, construction supervision, and design of engineering projects, both in the UK and internationally. Nick is currently assigned as the project manager to the JICA funded 187 megawatt Asahan No. 3 hydroelectric power plant construction project in Indonesia. And I'm very grateful that we have Nick with us here today, who's going to share his experience on that hydropower plant. And interesting, I can't wait to hear from Nick. We're going to start with BIM came late in this one. How was BIM adopted after contract commencement? So it wasn't necessarily thought about before, and introduced as a variation, and the challenges that Nick and his team faced as a result. So Nick, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stacy, for that. So as you mentioned, we started off this journey, as it were, and I'd like to present the challenges of implementing BIM after the project had actually started off. So for this, as I said, as Stacy said, we would like to use the Asahan 3 hydroelectric power plant construction project as the case study for the implementation of BIM. Just like to inform you about the project itself a little bit before we go on to how we implemented the work. The Asahan No. 3 hydroelectric power project is located in North Sumatra in Indonesia, and it's part of the Asahan River Hydro Cascade. And there are two schemes already upstream of the Asahan 3 project with 3 power plants. The Asahan 3 project consists of an intake weir, a 3-kilometer water transfer conduit and channel, a 7.8-kilometer water transfer tunnel, underground powerhouse, an open switch yard, and a 30-kilometer transmission line. The project covers a large area, 210 hectares, and will generate, as Stacy said, 174 megawatts of power for the people of North Sumatra, harnessing a maximum power plant discharge of 106 cumecs and a gross head of 196 meters. Also, as Stacy mentioned, the project is funded by the government of Japan through an overseas development aid loan, and the client is the National Electricity Company of Indonesia, PLN. The works are currently about 70% complete, with the civil works taking over, we hope, in December 2023, and commissioning of the generating units in the second half of 2024. The works are being executed in a multi-lot format, with contractors from Japan and Indonesia for the civil works, Austria for the metal works, Japan, India, and Indonesia for the electromechanical works, and a local Indonesian contractor for the transmission line. The total estimated cost of completion, including land acquisition and duties and taxes and other issues, is about 58 billion Japanese yen, or about 450 million US dollars. Each of the contracts is based on FIDIC form, either the MDB book, pink book, or the yellow book, which has been amended to meet with the government of Japan's procurement requirements. The engineer under the contract is Nippon Koei, and I am delegated to act as the engineer at site. So, coming on to the topic, BIM. Why did we implement BIM on this project halfway through? The reason was, as mentioned by Claire, some countries mandate, and the government of Indonesia in 2021 mandated that all technically dense government buildings shall implement BIM in the design and construction up to at least 5D. So, PLN, as the employer, requested Nippon Koei to try to implement BIM as a pilot study on the Asahan 3 project, even though the main contracts had already been signed before 2021 and the works were actually ongoing. As the works were ongoing, we had no choice but to implement BIM through the variation procedure that was existent in each of the contract lots. So, to the challenges, there were various challenges. The first and most difficult was to get the contractors on board to do this. They never signed up to implement what was essentially a design process, especially the civil works contractors. And the guys on site were there to build something physical and deliver the physical product. Okay. The second problem we had was that whilst the government of Indonesia had broadly mandated the implementation of BIM, it was somewhat unclear how this was to be actually implemented. Especially on a hydropower project in Indonesia, much of the ideas were related to buildings. So how are we going to implement it on a tunnel and an underground power station? Finally, of course, there was a difficulty, and Claire mentioned this, and so did Stacy, of getting the budget for it. Yeah. So, okay, the government has mandated it, but how is it going to benefit us financially whilst meeting the regulatory framework? To this end, we had to do some clever thinking to try to evaluate the numbers of clashes we may or may not have without BIM and with BIM, how to see what benefits and speed we could respond to the works on site with, and put some numbers and costs to this. Frankly, it was a difficult exercise. Initially, we had to hold discussions with the employer to define actually what the employer's information requirements were. This is the first time that PLN had implemented BIM. And after that, we had to have discussions with each of the contractors to define what the scope of the contractor's variation would be. As you mentioned previously, the other speaker, Each contractor was at a different stage of their understanding and utilization of BIM. This also presented several challenges. For example, the electromechanical and design build contractors were far more familiar with design and undertaking design during the execution and construction phase. However, the civil works contractor essentially had a red book contract where the employer had already finished the design. So what were we going to do with BIM, especially for the underground works and the tunnel? What was it needed for? Okay, so we had to define and try to, as much as possible, define what was needed within each variation order, and looking at FIDIC, looking at avoiding unbalancing the risk between each of the parties and agreeing the scope between each of the contractors. After a lot of discussion, especially for some of the Indian contractors, we had to revise the scope of the works and actually change some of the requirements, considering each contractor's capability and what stage each contract was at site at the start of the variation. With respect to the FIDIC contract itself, we tried to avoid as much as possible changing the terms of the contract. And we tried to define the deliverables, etc., within the variation documentation. Therefore, some of the standard clauses that were incorporated in FIDIC already, such as reporting, confidentiality, use of other parties' information and documentation, and IP conditions, were not amended in the variation. But we had to assign a specific BIM manager from the engineer's team, and we delegated the authorities of the engineer with respect to managing the BIM process to this BIM manager from Nippon Koei. So one of the keys to the successful delivery of the variations, we believe, was to undertake collaboration between the various parties involved in the design and production of the models. To this end, the variation specification required that each contractor assigned a BIM manager to each contract, and they were required to attend regular BIM coordination meetings held and chaired by the engineer's BIM manager to ensure and to develop collaboration during the building of the models themselves. However, one very specific challenge that we had was these works were being implemented during the height of the COVID pandemic. And therefore, having team meetings, face-to-face meetings to knock out things on site was very difficult. Plus, all the teams were in different countries, in Austria, in Japan, in India, Singapore, where Nippon Koei's BIM team is based, and in various parts of Indonesia, where the architectural models were being developed and the building models were being developed. So we had a challenge to arrange coordination meetings in various countries and define how to process these impacts. For PLN, as a power generating company, their main focus was the as-built documentation and the as-built asset information models. These models were to include the manuals and spare parts and other parts and information that were to be provided by the generating equipment that's to be installed in the power station, as well as information relating to the tunnel support systems and the geology that was encountered during the construction phase. So it was important to show how this information could be easily obtained in the as-built model that would then be handed over to the operational staff. And to be honest, we're still thinking about how to do this. And one of the things was PLN staff attended the coordination meetings, but these were from the capital works or construction unit, not from the operational units. So we had to therefore understand and define how to provide clear information to the actual power plant operators and the maintenance teams after completion of the construction phase. Frankly, during construction, this was a learning phase for all of us, and there was a requirement for collaboration and training for all of the contractors and the consultant and PLM to understand how to develop and deliver this in a hydropower environment in Indonesia. So there was a requirement to develop the collaboration protocols, and we had to communicate well throughout the process. As Stacy noted previously, BIM itself is not a product or a deliverable, and I do seriously believe that it is a process of how to implement systematically and try to attain those efficiency benefits that Claire was talking about. Therefore, from a construction point of view, I can't say that the implementation of BIM really changed drastically how we delivered the hydropower project, especially as the cost and scheduling delivery elements were not part of the pilot. But the pilot itself provided us benefits in managing the process of delivery and enhanced the collaboration between the disparate parties that were the 5 contractors involved in the work. And I hope going forward, future BIM implementation, especially if it's implemented earlier on, will render more benefits to the project. So to summarize, and I've gone over time a little bit, I believe that the BIM implementation delivered some tangible benefits with respect to defining better collaboration and avoided some of the clashes, and also instructed us to think more efficiently. So because Asahan is in that first stage of the 3 stages that Claire mentioned, we're still at the efficiency stage, but we're learning. And I hope that by implementing BIM on further projects, we will move into the next phase and the next phase again. So that's where we're at. Thank you very much, Stacy. Hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's really, really helpful. I've seen a couple of questions come into the chat, and I have a question as well, but I'm going to leave that to the Q&A section, given the time. But thank you very much. It's a really, really helpful case study that you've just taken us through. We're now going to move on to Krzysztof, and I won't even try to pronounce her surname again, because I apologize that I did not do so well the first time around, Krzysztof. But Krzysztof, welcome. Krzysztof is a bridge designer with Sweco Oslo. He is the winner of EFCA's Future Leaders Award in 2021, Europe's most talented engineer. Krzysztof is also the founder of Learn Grasshopper, helping engineers to learn parametric design. Krzysztof is also a regular blogger and YouTuber on digital technologies, and you can find him on what I find an incredibly insightful website called BIM Corner, which he co-founded. So now we just heard from Nick at one end of the spectrum. I believe Krzysztof is very much at the other end in terms of BIM adoption. And he's going to take us through the new technologies used on the world's first bridge built only using a BIM model, no 2D drawings, and what it means to literally skip the drawing production stage of the design process, and how computational design and new technologies are revolutionizing the construction industry. So Krzysztof, welcome. It's fantastic to have you with us today.
Thanks for this introduction. Thanks for having me. As you said, I'm a bridge designer. All the studies says that all children, when you ask them who wants to be in the future, people like children ask that they want to be a blogger and YouTuber, and I'm going to pursue these dreams. So, but still, I'm still designer, but I'm also active on the social media and trying to teach people what I have experienced and learn from the model-based projects. So at the screen right now, you will see the words biggest bridge, built, designed, and approved by the Norwegian Road Administration without use of drawings. So we skip production of the drawings. We cut production of drawings by 95%, which we still produce some drawings, but just a few of them, just to approve the process, the documentation. But all information were included. We have created a 3D model with all information necessary that previously was on the 3D model. As Stacy mentioned, I'm based in Norway. I'm originally from Poland, and working still with the computational design and teaching people to grasp the idea of new technologies. So if we go to the next slide, we will see the quote from the Mark Fisher, really well-known professor from Stanford University, that Bratislava Bridge is a lighthouse achievement for consulting engineers. And with this presentation today, I will present 3 topics that, from my point of view, why this project stands out from the rest. So this project, just short introduction, this is a free cantilever bridge. Yeah.
Krzysztof, can I interrupt for 2 seconds? Just to let you know, the voice is a bit crackly, and I think our audience is having trouble hearing. So it might just require maybe a little bit slower speaking or a microphone adjustment. But thank you very much.
Yeah, that's okay. So this bridge is a free cantilever bridge placed near Oslo. So it's about 634 meters long bridge with a main span about 200. So we have a huge dimensions. As I said before, we cut production of drawings for 95%. And all the information, reinforcement, pre-stressing cables, concrete measurements, everything was in the model. So in 2020, we got an award of the best BIM project in the world, and mainly because we use the new technologies. If we go to the next slide, we will see our road, how we designed our structures. So from the centuries, on the left side, you can see that the traditional way of making 3D objects at the side. So we prepared the 2D drawings, and as a representation afterwards, we built a structure. Afterwards, when all the CAD, environmental, and BIM that came to play a huge role, we started to prepare 3D models. So 3D models, 3D representation, digital twin, you can call it as well, but still we have this process of creating 2D drawings. So from this 3D model, we again make a flattening of this construction and making 2D drawings. And then, as a traditional way, we are building from that. And now, with the new technologies, we can skip this process. So as you can assume, it's less errors. So first, in the process of creating of 2D drawings, because we are using better models with the better accuracy, and then we are not skipping also this process of creating from 2D drawings into 3D model. So this really helps us to avoid a lot of mistakes. 90% of mistakes were reduced in the production of the of using the 3D model at the construction site. So for me as a designer, we got none of the telephone calls or emails question about how to use the model, because if you have the 3D representation, it's easier to understand the model, to structure, to complex bridge as it was in this case, and also to create, to order the reinforcement for the materials. But the main reason why we use the 3D model, we can see on the next slide, because everyone in the industry right now is talking about robots, automatization, artificial intelligence. And the main reason why we are producing 3D models with all the information is that robots cannot read the drawings. We cannot just feed robots with the 2D prints, with all the information. We need to, yes, Stacy?
I'm going to interrupt again. Could we maybe possibly try turning off your camera? That would be fantastic. Maybe if that improves the audio at all.
Yeah, maybe I can also switch to another microphone.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry for that.
No.
Sorry for that. So the main reason why we are making these 3D models is because we would like to fit all the robots that in the future, maybe, we hope so, that will be at the site. We see the manufacturing industry, that there's lots of robots and not so many robots at the construction industry. So this is the main reason why we follow this dream of 3D model and BIM at the construction site. If we go to the next slide, Stacy in her first presentation mentioned generative components as a low-code way of making new softwares and programs. So this is what I would like to mention here because it's really important topic. I'm an academic lecturer in the Norwegian university, and I see this global change, how engineers are going to design in the future. So nowadays, there are new people are coming from universities and already knowing how to program. And I'm not speaking about programming, like hard code programming, as you can see on this picture with the text base. I'm talking about like low code visual programming, that engineers are going to use components that already someone else created, but engineers with the perspective are going to use these components for their work. And in this project in Ranselva, we have a whole team. It's called parametric design team, and it's becoming more and more popular in our industry. So we have bridge designers with all the bridge expertise, but that with the little bit skill of programming. And it's coming more and more popular, and it's coming, you can automate new things, and actually you can create this incredible complex 3D models. Because if we are speaking this, if we are skipping this process of drawing production, we have to deliver better models. And with some tools, standard tools that are now available, we have some limitations. So with the help of programming, we can easily create these 3D models. If we go to the last slide from this presentation, I would like to mention maybe the main reason why we are using BIM models. So of course, it's a collaboration. And again, as with the low code, we took this experience from the IT industry that we are using programmers, and we are organizing kind of hackathons. So hackathons, there are kind of meetings, like intensive design meetings, where all the programmers are sitting 2-3 days together in the one room and designing one structure. And together with the integrated concurrent engineering, which comes from Stanford University, we are sitting together with the contractor, suppliers, and designers, of course, and clients. And during this meeting, when we have programming, we have programmable structure, so we can see all the changes. So for example, if client asks about some change, we do not answer that, okay, we will check this and we'll come back with after 1 week with the answer. Now we can just in the couple of minutes or half an hour, just during the meeting, check what is the response of the structure and tell about the changes during the meeting, so we can really faster make of all the agreements. And Nicholas said about the problems collaboration on the cross-border when you especially working with the different countries. And one of the advantage of this project, the Ranselva Bridge was designed in the 5 different countries with the 5 different specific of designing. And the thing is that when you are making a 2D when you produce the 2D drawings, every single country has own specific way of doing drawing. When we skip this drawing production, we have 3D model. And basically 3D model is kind of the same in every single country. So we have this kind of common input, and it was easier to collaborate on these 3D models. And in addition, we are using programming, which is also native like language text-based or visual programming, it was easier to sit in this meeting, see on the 3D model together with client and see all of the changes. So to just make a summary, I hope these three things, which were making a model-based project using low code as a parametric design, that in additional to your skills, like you are designing a road, building, road, it doesn't matter what you are designing, but if you are add these programming skills, you can create your softwares by yourself. And the third point was a collaboration. And of course, I think that everyone will agree, like with the 3D representation, when you have during the meeting, it's easier to just collaborate and make your thoughts about the project. So I think like when we have this topic of this today's webinar, if we are going to maintain traditional ways of working or the change and make a paradigm of a shift. So I'm definitely on the latter one to make this transformation.
Thank you very much, Krzysztof. I would agree with you. I think you definitely are on the paradigm shift, and it's really, really exciting to see. Now, apologies if I missed this because of the audio in the beginning, but I'm really interested to know, to get everything to be a model-based project, all models, can you describe for us just a couple of the challenges that it took to get there? Because if I can say from other jurisdictions around the world, you know, there may have been those resisting, those not wanting to change. I mean, what were some of the challenges you faced to get there?
Yeah, of course, we had lots of challenges. We started with model-based project in the bridge in 2016, so it's been already a couple of years. But from this time, I can see that for designers and consultants industry, it was not a problem at all, because we've been used to creating 3D models. We have to just create better models with more accuracy. But the biggest challenge, of course, it was on the site, and maybe just not only on the construction side, but to change the whole chain. Suppliers, the client, everyone needs to change the way of working, and especially on the site. First of all, in Scandinavia, it's really harsh climate, wind, snow, rain, name it, and how to use the new technologies at the site. Some people like need to use the tablets, how to get information, and some people, the workers, do not have tablets at home. They don't know how to use the tablets. So it also was the new way how to teach people how to use the new technologies. So this is the whole change. The main challenge was to change the whole industry for that. And here there came road administration, that actually it was mandatory to all of the supply chain to deliver and work with the 3D models to get the additional points when you are bidding the contract. So actually you are getting more points, and it's easier to win the project if you are actually using 3D models.
Thank you, Krzysztof. That's really fascinating. I can see a lot of questions coming for you in the chat because I think it's just so, you know.
So, sorry for the audio problem, but I hope you can hear me well now.
Not at all. Yeah, it's perfect right now. Thank you so much, Krzysztof. So we are going to turn now to our last speaker, who before the Q&A, we have Jeremy Glover, who is a partner at Fenwick Elliott, the UK's largest construction law firm, and Jeremy specializes in construction and energy law. He is also the immediate past president of the executive board of Region 2 of the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation. Jeremy is a member of the FIDIC President's List of Approved Dispute Adjudicators and a member of FIDIC's newly formed Net Zero Task Group. Jeremy also assisted in the 2022 update of the BIM advisory note that I mentioned previously, and he regularly speaks on contract issues relating to BIM. Welcome, Jeremy. And I will pass over to you. Jeremy's going to take us through some of the key issues that you need to think about when adopting and implementing BIM from a legal and contractual point of view. Thank you, Jeremy.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Stacy, and thank you very much, Claire, Nicholas and Krzysztof. I mean, that's been absolutely fascinating, and it's just really exciting to hear about all the rapidly accelerating changes that the use of BIM and digital technologies are going to bring. So unfortunately, now you're onto the dull legal bit, but please stay with me because this is really important. Listening to everyone who's spoken this morning, it's been, as I said, fascinating, interesting to hear what's been said and noticing the different levels of adoption, the different skill sets that everyone has. And this is where or why the legal side and your contract is so important. What you need to do, go back to basics. If you are a legal advisor, it can be quite a task, quite tough to keep up with the accelerating pace of change that we've been hearing about so eloquently today. But go back to basics. Think about contract risk management. 4 things you need to think about when working with BIM, putting your contracts together. No matter what contract, protocols, guidance notes, or otherwise are required on a project, you must understand your obligations, your liabilities, and limitations within those documents. Because if the contract documents do not align with each other, or they're not sufficiently detailed enough, there can be ambiguity, and there can be uncertainty, and this leads to problems. And with BIM, with digital technologies, quite often the devil's in the details. So make sure your contract documents align and the obligations align clearly. So what I'm saying is make sure you understand what you're being asked to do. Because depending on the terms of your contracts, there could be binding documents with obligations contained in. You just need to understand and be alert to what they are. We've been discussing BIM. Everyone's been talking about BIM as a process, BIM as a means of sharing, exchanging information. It represents a sort of shared digital representation of a built asset through all the stages of development, design, construction, and the operation processes. It's there quite often as a really reliable, helpful decision-making tool. Now, the really difficult bit for you from a contract point of view, you do need to describe what type of BIM digital technologies you're going to use. Now, a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about levels. There's a lot of talk about level 2. But what we found is that no one really knew what that meant, or at least alternatively, everyone had their own view of what that meant. So again, that can lead to uncertainty. So first thing you do, scrap that, throw away any talk of levels. Start with effectively a blank canvas. And what I mean by that is you must define contractually what you need for your project. Think about data and how data is going to be used. Think about timescales, who is doing what and when. Look for clear definitions for the information needed by the owner, clear explanations of the methods, processes, deadlines that are going to govern production. What you're looking for is efficient, effective transfers of information. How is the information going to be stored? How is the information going to be shared? There is around an international standard, ISO 19650. It's introduced at the beginning of 2019. And the idea behind ISO 19650 is to aim for and introduce a common approach to the management of information. It can be used anywhere. It has national annexes to define the standards to be used in a particular region. And the idea is just as FIDIC does. They're looking to come up with familiar concepts, processes. They're looking to try and encourage and ensure that everybody uses similar terminology. And again, the ISO there, it defines the processes and principles and requirements for the management of information during the delivery and the operational phase of assets. And there is no definition of BIM set out in the ISO 19650 series, quite deliberately, because every project is going to be different. So they're the key things that you need to think about. And many of those, of course, are the key things that you need to think about on any project, defining exactly what you're going to do. I was asked one thing, if I could describe how you incorporate your BIM documentation into your contract. That's really important. Any protocol or document is binding only when it's incorporated expressly into a contract. So you need to think about what documents you're actually incorporating. And the key document from a working with BIM point of view is going to be your protocol. I've heard it described as a contractual wrapper. It's a document that defines a code of conduct. It's a code of contractual conduct, if you like. It sets out the risk allocation between the parties. It sets out model delivery. It sets out delivery timetables. Effectively, what it's doing is establish the legal framework for operation and the use of BIM on a project. It's setting out details of the obligations that the parties to a project agree to undertake. The UK BIM Alliance have produced an information protocol that is designed for working with ISO 19650. But going to basics, how do you incorporate the BIM document? Well, I'll try and describe it as simply as I can. Step one, you need a defined term, BIM protocol. BIM protocol means the information protocol in the form attached in a particular appendix or perhaps contained in the employer's requirement. Step two, you need a new particular condition, which will say something like the employer and the contractor shall comply with their respective obligations set out in the protocol. They will have the benefit of any rights granted in the protocol, and they will have the benefit of any limitations or exclusions of their liability contained within that protocol. Step three, establish where the protocol sits in the priority of contract documents. FIDIC Standard Clause 1.5 sets out a priority list. Documents forming the contract are taken to be mutually explanatory of one another. If there's conflict, ambiguity, or discrepancy, you then list the priority of documents. A BIM protocol is a project-specific document. It's likely to be quite high in the list, perhaps after the particular conditions. So that's very general terms how you would incorporate a protocol. Now, I know that we want to have some time for Q&A, and I know that if I started getting into what do you do with planning, IP, security, etc., we'll be here for the rest of the afternoon. But I did want to highlight a couple of things. One of the things we wanted to do today is to look at what's on the horizon. And one thing we've been talking about a lot, everyone's talking about collaboration. And I think there you may see what's on the horizon changes to how insurance, for example, works. The standard FIDIC form of contract, the insuring obligations, broadly, the onus lies on the contractor. But what the FIDIC contract doesn't do, and there's no need for it to do, it doesn't consider parties other than the contractor and the employer. Now, subcontractors, suppliers, designers may well fall under the contractor's ambit, but what about funders? What about cybersecurity? And often the works on one FIDIC contract are part of a greater project whole. And one thing you're seeing is this concept of integrated project insurance, whereby effectively you have one insurance policy that covers the entire project. These projects, the idea is they're collaborative, they're based on mutual trust. The insurance is used to protect against risk and not liability. The idea is then it removes the blame culture. The project has the insurance, so parties aren't looking to blame other people for what's going on. It's sort of create a blame-free relationship. If the project goes wrong, parties are sharing pre-agreed share of the pain share maximum. It encourages parties to work collaboratively. There are some projects here in the UK where integrated project insurance is being shown to work really well. The idea is there are no claims allowed between the parties, which should minimize each party's legal exposure. And at least in theory, reduce or help to reduce professional indemnity insurance costs. And the final thing briefly about looking to the horizon, Claire in particular has talked about the whole life cycle asset management of projects. And that's what we're seeing now. One of the big changes in the way that construction projects operating. And I think from a contractual point of view, we're going to see changes to the taking over provisions, get a softening, if you like, of the taking over conditions. BIM is there, is providing, in simple terms, there's a complete documentary digital record of the design and the construction of the project, but that extends into the operational change. There's a focus on commissioning, handover, and training for users and operators. And they want to know from the people who've designed and constructed the building how things work. So you've got this idea of a sort of a smoothish transition from construction into handover, a better understanding of end user needs. What you're going to see perhaps is a planned and gradual handover process. Instead of having a 6-month period of defects notification, you may have a period of, 2-3 years of aftercare. So I think looking on the horizon, I think the way that takeover operates on a building, you may find that that's something that's going to change. But like I say, there's many things. It is exciting, and it's also exciting it's an exciting time for lawyers too. But I sort of thought, better bring my talk to an end there.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And I would, of course, agree with that about lawyers. And thank you very much for bringing up part 2, which clearly we need to have because there's so much to get through on this webinar. But just briefly, you mentioned the increasing emphasis on the whole life cycle of projects. In fact, the whole life cycle of projects has come up a number of times today. And Jeremy, you talked about the impact of takeover. Are there other areas where BIM digital design might impact on or assist with achieving a more sustainable, a more environmental friendly outcome?
We're short of time, aren't we? Yes.
We're short of time, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yes. I mean, many ways. Reporting, for example. Reporting is a key part of measuring greenhouse gas emissions, measuring embodied carbon. Digital design, similar approaches can shorten the time needed to generate reports. If you can give everyone access to data more quickly, it speeds up and makes the decision-making process. You can make more informed design decisions during the construction process. That must help you to assess and mitigate any climate challenges. But also, again, I think everyone's talked about the importance of looking at the early stages of projects at the outset, during planning, setting carbon budgets, getting everybody involved at an early stage, which is something that using BIM does. It encourages a more collaborative approach. Modeling can help stakeholders make more informed decisions. You can look at different scenarios, and that must help from an environmental sustainable point of view.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I think this would be a great time to start on the time we have left on a general Q&A. And I just wonder if anyone else on the panel wants to talk further about what role do you see BIM and digital technologies playing in this decarbonization of the industry? Does anyone have anything further to add to Jeremy's comments?
I think Jeremy summed it up really well with optioneering and being able to take a very close look at it. Anthony, Tony.
Thanks, Claire. I think we're having a look at this at a number of forums within FIDIC. I think one thing BIM does is give us, it's already been mentioned, collaboration, data, information about our designs, about our planning decisions. It enables us to quantify so many things about the whole infrastructure delivery and operational processes. And in doing so, we are then able to feed data into the models. So I believe you're going to see the BIM modeling become much more data hungry, much more complex, but enable us to make much better decisions in across a whole range of things. And you know, there's a project here in Australia which is being conducted up in Queensland, which is actually learning how to value environmental assets and using GIS in that case to do so. So there's no reason in my mind, no barrier to stop us extending BIM, digital twins and GIS into this space to have a really holistic understanding of all the elements of our projects.
I would like to add one more thing to that, how BIM, maybe not BIM specifically, but new technologies, how can help us to create more sustainable solutions, because this is the main topic, how we are creating more sustainable solutions. And the thing is that the main role will play in the future optimization of the constructions. And we as engineers, we can create maybe 2, 3, 4 examples how the structure can look like. But if we are going to use the power of computers, we can make hundreds and thousands of iterations. And okay, we can base on our experience from previous projects, but if we give the possibility to a computer to assess all the problems, like with the how expensive will be construction, what the product will be, and we can choose from the thousands of solutions this one. So I think this is the also huge impact if we can optimize solution and get this most optimal one.
Thank you, Krzysztof. I think possibly moving on to another theme that came up throughout the course of the past hour or so are skills, roles and skills, and how these are changing with BIM, with new digital technologies, and what's required. We heard about Krzysztof talking about coding. Claire, you mentioned it in the beginning. How is this changing? What are we going to see in this respect? No?
Who do you want to start?
Claire, if you would start, please.
All right. I think I already touched on some of it. I think that our engineers need to be comfortable using technology in different ways. That does not mean that they all have to become coders. And I think Krzysztof made that point, right? You can use machine learning and AI because it's built into the technology that you're already using. You don't have to necessarily actually be a coder yourself. But certainly I think that technical skills are ramping up. Technology is also built into the products that you are using, regardless of who they're from. I think, though, as I mentioned before, as we get into more portfolio-based analysis, as we get into leveraging AI and machine learning in order to make recommendations, we are going to need more data scientists, more data modelers. And the other thing that I think is really important is training, right? Nick talked a lot about training and the training that was required to kind of level up everybody to the same level of understanding of what they were doing and what BIM was requiring of them. So I think training and continuous improvement and continuous learning is really, really important. So the technology is not something to be afraid of, but something to be embraced. And one of the things that Nick mentioned was kind of a new role, at least for on that project, Nick, and I'll let you jump in here, but the role of a BIM manager, and that's important, right? If you're going to implement BIM consistently, someone needs to be in charge of it. And I would say that's also true for digital transformation in general. It is not going to organically happen in a cohesive direction unless someone is spearheading and coordinating that. Otherwise, you got mayhem, which is a former CIO is, yeah, I'm a little cringy on that. I don't like that. So mayhem's not good, but training, strategic direction, everybody pushing together is important. Nick, I'll pass it back to you to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, training is a very important issue here, especially. Sorry, am I off again? No, I'm on. especially in the ODA world where I live in, overseas development aid projects. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of new technology. People like to see pictures and things, but how does this impact, and how do you work on this? Krzysztof talked about training of the guys on site with using tablets, etc., on site.
Yeah.
Half of our labor, I would say, is indigenous neighbor that comes in one day and goes out the next. We can't hand over an iPad to each of those guys, because that would be more than their monthly salary, significantly, and it would disappear. So those kind of training issues and how to spread down the technology is really important in the 107 countries that are listening into this project. Another issue was the internet. I personally have had to come into a hotel today because I can't trust the internet on site. So you've got this common data environment where everybody's throwing thousands of megabytes of data into it. If you don't have a good internet on site, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. Yeah, we had the problem with Krzysztof's mic 10 minutes ago. These are things that happen, and you've got to train them. The expectations have got to be leveled up slowly. As I said, we're in the efficiency base at the moment, not only in Nippon Koei, but in our client, trying to improve. But I don't think we can, say, well, we're going to build all our dams with robots.
I would just add one thing to Niklas about the tablets and laptop at the site. When we have started with the model-based projects, of course, we didn't give all the tablets to all the workers. But the thing, as Claire said about the new roles, it was a new role at the construction site. It was a BIM coordinator just specifically at the site. Just one person who was like a skill set that was going from one project to another project. So this is the main point to start, to train the one person who will be responsible, who will be in charge of the model, and how to give this information from this 3D model to other workers. And as a first stage, this BIM coordinator at site, he create all these 3D print screens from the 3D model and actually make a printed out, laminate and deliver at the site, because it was the first stage. We are not starting with the AR and all the technologies, VR at the site. We are taking the lower hanging fruits and just printing the print screens and just giving it to the site. So as the first step.
Thank you very much, Krzysztof. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up what has been a fantastic hour and a half discussion. And I think on that note, we've just been talking about the challenges for adoption, for implementation. And we have one last poll that we'd be ever so grateful if everyone could take some time, just 30 seconds to look at. What do you think is the biggest challenge in the construction industry preventing wider adoption of BIM? Is it the lack of training, education, or skills? The implementation costs, resistance to change, lack of industry standards? Or are you in that space of no challenges and it's widely adopted? Very interested in your views on this. And do we have the results from those remaining? Okay. Mostly the lack of training, education, and skills, but still a wide range of answers. Resistance to change, as we just spoke about for the last few minutes. Thank you very much for that. So it just leaves me to wrap up what has been an excellent hour and a half. Thank you so much to our panelists. We started with Claire, and you took us through the trends, and I'm loving the 3 maturity stages of efficiency, effectiveness, and transformation. And then Nick, you took us, what are you doing with BIM after the contract's already started, after the project's already started? And on the other end of the spectrum, we heard from Krzysztof, and not having 2D drawings, we're solely in the 3D space and the challenges and advantages that can bring. And finally, thank you very much to Jeremy for taking us through how to contractually incorporate BIM and do so successfully, watching out for those risks and liabilities. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to our audience for attending today. And if I can just finally end on, we were talking about BIM, we were talking about digital today, but just as you heard it come through, we didn't have too much time to ask for further questions on collaboration, but clearly it's more than just being about digital. Being digital is not enough. It's about the people, it's about the collaboration, about creating value and being outcome orientated. What are you trying to get at? So having technology is not enough. It certainly takes this holistic approach to achieve success, but there certainly is enough technology out there. And the question is how to adopt and what do you want to do with it? So with that, thank you so much to our panel for an excellent discussion. And I shall turn it back over to Tony.
Thank you very much, Stacey. That was excellent. And I do thank the panelists as you have, and Martina, very much appreciated. I've been in this space for 15 years, and I can assure you there's a very great journey ahead of the industry. And I can see from what we saw earlier tonight, there's a great opportunity to improve the productivity of the industry across the world simply by wider adoption of these technologies. So there's a lot of opportunity. And whether you want to think about it as data-informed creativity or creativity-informed data, whichever way it goes, I think we do have an exciting future ahead of us. Just to mention a few upcoming events for FIDIC, our next webinar is on the 6th of June, so keep an eye out for that. These are arranged by our various committees, and this one is going to be organised by the Membership Committee and the Directors and Secretaries Advisory Council. We have the Contract Users Conferences, we have the Europe, Middle East and Africa Conference on the 10th and 11th of May, and then the London conference, the international one, 28th, 29th November in London in the UK. And of course, we have the State of the World reports, which we continue to work on. And we have one on the energy sector on the 22nd of June, all about focusing on net zero. We also have a pretty important conference coming up in Livingstone, in Africa, in Zambia. And very much looking forward to that. You can see it there. I think it's the 21st to the 24th of May in Livingstone. So a wonderful place to be in the world, as well as hopefully a very exciting and informative event. And of course, beyond that, we have our, we've mentioned those, we have our Global Infrastructure Conference in Singapore, 10th and 12th of September, which hopefully will be an excellent event. So I thank you again for tonight. Thank you for all the participants and giving us your time. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you to you, Stacey, and the Digital Transformation Committee for the great work you're doing. Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening.